No one was coming to save her. The realization settled deep in her bones, colder than the night air, heavier than the rubble pressing down on her mangled legs. Xena coughed, dark purple blood dripping from her lips as she struggled to keep her eyes open. Her small body trembled, caked in dust and streaked with the crimson of her own injuries. She could barely breathe. Her ribs felt like they had been turned to glass, fractured under the weight of collapsed concrete. Screams filled the air, echoing through the ruined cityscape. Plasma blasts streaked through the sky, cutting through the thick smoke like vengeful gods carving their fury into the heavens. Explosions rumbled in the distance, shaking the very ground beneath her. Dros soldiers and Korth mercenaries tore through the streets, their armored boots pounding against the debris-covered pavement as they fought for dominance over a world that had already been turned to ash. Xena wasn't supposed to be here. She should have been far away from this war zone, tucked safely inside her family's small home in the Eastern District. But safety no longer existed in a world like this. The war had swallowed everything whole, reducing neighborhoods to wastelands, turning homes into graves. She let out a weak cry, barely more than a whimper. It wasn't a plea for help. No one would hear her over the chaos. It was instinct, a desperate attempt to cling to life even as darkness pressed in around her. A shadow loomed overhead. She barely had the strength to lift her head, but she forced herself to look up, blinking through the haze of pain and dust. A Korth mercenary towered over her, his 4 crimson eyes gleaming in the dim light. His reptilian face twisted into a sneer as he raised his plasma rifle, the barrel glowing with lethal energy. Xena froze. The mercenary's clawed finger curled around the trigger. For a moment she thought this was it. This was how her story ended. A single shot, a flash of light, and then nothing. But then, to her shock, the Korth soldier hesitated. His sneer faltered, his eyes scanning her broken form. He shook his crested head, muttered something under his breath, and lowered the weapon. Without another glance he turned and stomped off into the carnage. Xena didn't know if she should be grateful or afraid. He had spared her life, but he had also left her to die slowly. She shut her eyes, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. If this was the end, she just wished it wouldn't hurt so much. Then, through the cacophony of war, another voice cut through. "Hold on, kid!" She barely registered the sound of footsteps approaching at full sprint. A pair of hands, warm, human hands, grasped her, lifting debris away with a gentleness she hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. "Stay with me," the voice urged, softer this time. Xena forced her eyes open. Through the blur of pain and exhaustion she saw a face, weathered, lined with scars, but kind. His green eyes burned with determination as he knelt beside her, his uniform marked with the insignia of the Earth Alliance, Sergeant Jack Thompson. He was human. He shouldn't have been here. Earth was supposed to be neutral in this war, yet here he was, cradling her fragile body as if she was something precious, something worth saving. "You're gonna be okay, kid," Jack murmured, brushing a strand of dirty hair from her face. She wanted to believe him. But as another explosion rocked the streets, as the air filled with screams and the sickening scent of burning flesh, she wondered if okay was even possible anymore. Jack wasted no time. His training kicked in as he pulled a medkit from his belt. His hands steady despite the chaos around him. He worked quickly, sealing the punctures in her lungs with biofoam, wrapping pressure bandages around the worst of her wounds. Xena whimpered as he injected her with something. Painkillers, antibiotics, she couldn't tell. All she knew was that for the first time in hours, the unbearable agony dulled to something manageable. Jack pressed his comm link. "Ramirez, I need an emergency medevac now. Civilians down." "One critical." Static crackled in response. Then the dreaded reply. "Negative, Thompson. Command says no unauthorized extractions. You know the rules. Leave the kid and get back to your post." Jack clenched his jaw, his grip tightening protectively around Xena's small frame. "Screw that." He cut the link. Xena barely understood what was happening, but she knew one thing. Jack wasn't leaving her behind. The nearest Earth Alliance forward base was 3 kilometers east, 3 kilometers of open war zone. Jack knew the risk. If he was caught disobeying orders, it wouldn't just be a demotion, it would be a court-martial. His entire career, his life, everything he had worked for, would be over. But none of that mattered. "Hang on, sweetheart," he murmured, shifting her securely into his arms. "We're getting out of here." He ran. The city blurred around them as Jack sprinted through the crumbling streets, dodging plasma fire and artillery strikes. He moved like a man possessed, his only focus the fragile life in his arms. Xena drifted in and out of consciousness. She could hear Jack's heartbeat beneath her cheek, steady and strong, grounding her even as the world around them collapsed. Somewhere along the way they ran into more survivors, wounded Droz civilians, cowering in the ruins. A woman, her pale blue skin smeared with dirt, reached out with a trembling hand. "Please," she rasped. "My daughter. Take her. Get her to safety." Xena stirred weakly at the sound of the voice. "Mom?" Jack hesitated. He couldn't carry them all. "I'll send help," he promised. The woman's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Jack pressed his comm link again, switching to an emergency frequency. "This is Sergeant Thompson. Civilians at my location. Critical condition. I need a full rescue team now." "Copy that, Sergeant. Birds incoming. ETA 7 minutes." It was the best he could do. He tightened his hold on Xena and kept moving. The base gates were in sight. Relief flooded him as he saw Earth Alliance soldiers standing guard. They had made it. The second they crossed the threshold, medics rushed forward, carefully transferring Xena onto a hover gurney. Jack watched as Dr. Amir Singh, the base's chief medical officer, took over. "You did good, Sergeant," Singh said. "We'll take it from here." Jack nodded, but his hands curled into fists. After everything, he wasn't ready to let her go. Then a sharp voice cut through the air. "Sergeant Thompson!" Jack turned to see Captain Ethan Reeves striding toward him, his expression unreadable. "You disobeyed a direct order," Reeves said. "You know what that means." Jack met his gaze, standing tall. "I know, sir, and I'd do it again." Reeves studied him for a long moment. Then, to Jack's surprise, his expression softened, just slightly. "You've got two choices, Sergeant. Take a demotion and reassignment or face court-martial." Jack didn't even hesitate. "I'll take the demotion, but I want to stay with the girl, just until she wakes up." Reeves sighed. "Fine, but after that you're on latrine duty for a month." Jack almost laughed. "Understood, sir." Days passed. Xena healed. She never let go of Jack's hand. The war didn't end overnight, but in the weeks that followed, something changed. Humans and Droz alike began working together. Peace felt like more than just a distant dream. And when the time finally came for Jack to leave, Xena pressed a small hand-carved charm into his palm. "A good luck charm," she whispered, "to keep you safe." Jack swallowed past the lump in his throat. "Thank you, kid. I'll keep it forever." And he did. Years later, standing before a new generation of recruits, Jack held up the worn charm. "This," he said, "is a reminder of why we're here. Not to fight wars, but to save lives. To make sure that in the darkest of times there's still someone willing to stand up and say, 'Not today.'" And somewhere across the stars, a young Droz girl smiled, knowing that a single act of kindness had changed the course of history.